In this parable of Jesus, there were two characters who were not very happy with the return of the prodigal son. Which are the two characters in this story that were not happy with his coming back home? I would say they were the elder son and the fattened calf. Of course, the elder son did not want to welcome his brother back home, and the fattened calf became dinner. So they were both unhappy. Well, today, I would like to explore the problem of the elder son. When the younger son acted irresponsibly and hit rock bottom in his life, and then he repented and returned to ask his father for mercy, the father welcomed him back with open arms and rejoiced that he had been lost and now had been found. But the elder son had a problem with that. He was the sort of guy who followed all the rules. He was loyal, disciplined, obedient. And year after year, he stayed on the farm with his dad, working the fields diligently, season after season. And all of that is very honorable. And when his little brother came back home, the elder brother went into a jealous rage at his father's total forgiveness. The reaction of that elder son was, I would say, the typical reaction of a human being to the serious sins of another. He was harsh and unforgiving. He was self-righteous and judgmental toward his little brother. I think the mistake of that elder brother was to think that God's love and mercy are limited resources, not enough to go around. But that's a mistake. God's love and mercy are infinite resources. They will never run out. There will always be plenty to go around for everyone. You and I might sometimes react to others like that elder son did, following all the rules diligently, loyal and obedient, and keeping a distance from sinners, expecting to be rewarded for the good that we do, and becoming resentful when the irresponsible ones get a break. Sometimes we might feel like he did. Now remember why Jesus told this parable in the first place. It was because the scribes and the Pharisees were complaining about the fact that Jesus welcomed sinners and ate meals with them. They didn't like the fact that he hung around with all these sinners. What Jesus was trying to do by creating this parable and teaching it was to help those scribes and Pharisees to see that their worldview needed to change. Well, what about us? How can we live in a way that responds to that parable? Particularly when you think about what that elder son went through. Well, I've got 5 ideas as to how we can respond personally to this parable, particularly related to the elder son. The first thing we can do is forgive people. I know sometimes we don't want to forgive. Sometimes we feel like we can't forgive. But what's happening is that our refusal to forgive, our unforgiving stance, is blocking the work of God's grace in our hearts. What we need is to take on the compassionate attitude of the Father. In Luke 6:36, it says, "Be compassionate as your Father is compassionate." That's the model for us. We need to let our personality be a warm refuge for others to come home to with a spirit of forgiveness. A second thing we can do in response to this parable of the prodigal son is we can ask forgiveness. We can ask forgiveness of others and of God. So you think about in your life, to whom do you need to say, "I'm sorry"? There might be somebody that you need to return to and apologize. And then think about asking forgiveness of God. Christ has given us the great sacrament of penance or confession, for grace and spiritual healing. Especially in the time of Lent, it's an opportunity to avail ourselves of that opportunity so that we can be forgiving, we can ask forgiveness of others and of God. Here's another thing we can do in response to this parable of the prodigal son. Don't get bent out of shape when it appears that God has been highly generous to somebody else. Don't worry about it. God is God and we're not. And I have no right to judge God. It is God's prerogative to be generous and compassionate as He wills. That's the essence of God. I should never expect Him to be anything else. Fourth thing we can do is make efforts to build bridges rather than build walls between us and other people. That means in our families, if there's a need for forgiveness, we need to take the first step toward forgiveness and reconciliation in the family. It also means in society to work toward reconciliation of different groups that have not been getting along. Maybe that's groups that need racial reconciliation or class differences or whatever it might be. We can be agents of change and reconciliation in our society. Another application of this need to make efforts to build bridges, particularly with those who went down the wrong path, like the younger son, is we can choose to go visit prisons and help in the rehabilitation of prisoners and ex-convicts. There's a lot we can do as Catholics to go visit prisoners as Jesus encourages us to do. The fifth and last thing that I would recommend that we do in response to this parable is examine how we live as a community or as a parish. Our parish communities are not intended to be ghettos of pristine perfection, isolated from the stains of this ugly world. Rather, like St. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, in the second reading today, we are called to be ambassadors for Christ in the ministry of reconciliation. And that ministry of reconciliation is not just the priest hearing confessions. It's all of us members of the church serving as ministers of reconciliation and ambassadors for Christ in all the contexts in which we interact. Jesus teaches us that the proper response to the sins of our neighbors is not to be aloof, resentful, distant, or holier than thou, but rather we are called to speak the truth in love and to hold people accountable for their behavior, to stand up for what is right, and to stand always ready to welcome the sinner back home, and to rejoice in their conversion. In the words of St. Paul, the old things have passed away. Behold, new things have come. Whoever is in Christ is a new creation.